Hi. We're wrapping up the repair on the Rittenhouse RCM4 master station, and yesterday parts came in. I have to make a second parts order because sometimes when you work on things that you don't normally work on a lot, you need parts that you don't always have on hand. And so the other thing that happens is sometimes when you repair something that doesn't work at all when you begin, you find that once you begin to bring it back to life, you find more and more things wrong, and then sometimes you have to make another parts order. So one of the things that I did discover early on, and I knew that was going to happen, is the output transistors, that's this one and this one, need to be replaced. So, why? Well, one, because they're old. Two, because one of these, this one most likely, has been replaced at some time in the past. This is an RCA transistor. I do not know the date of it because the date code, if it is a date code, I don't know. And this one is a Texas Instruments. I would assume that this one is original because it has a date code of 03 of 66, which would be the third week of 1966, which sort of corresponds with when the set was made. This one, I don't know. In an amplifier design like this, the output transistors, these two, should be what's referred to as a matched pair. Now we're going to get moderately geeky, but not too much. Sets from this era do not use silicon transistors, they use germanium transistors. Germanium was the substance that they used in early transistors before silicon became the popular and better choice. Transistors have many different measurements. If you take a good transistor tester, like I use one of these a lot, this is a Peak Atlas DCA Pro, it's a DCA 75. You hook up the leads to the transistor, you push the button, and it tells you all kinds of magical information about the transistor under test. The thing about matching transistors is one of the measurements of a transistor is its gain, also referred to as the HFE. All transistors, these are the new ones. They will have three important bits of information on the transistor data sheet. The data sheet is the technical description of the transistor. Gives you all the parameters, all the measurements, all the characteristics. What we care about when you need matched transistors is the gain. For instance, for these, which are the direct replacements for these, are the original ones, for the gain, the three parameters are the minimum amount, the maximum amount, and what is most typical. So for these, the minimum gain is 50, the maximum gain is 165, and the typical gain is 90, and that's what they are. Now, we're going to talk about these and gain in a second. To give you some idea of how the world of transistors work, many amplifiers will specify matched pairs. And back in the olden days, like when this was made, transistors would be graded by the manufacturer of the transistor into different groups based on their gain. And it's not as if, well, today we're going to make transistors with a gain of 75. That's not the way it worked. They would manufacture the transistors, and then, because the manufacturing processes were more primitive in the 50s, 60s, and probably into the 70s, especially compared to today, it's 2024, where the manufacturing processes are much more uniform and better, they might measure the gain of each transistor from a batch and then grade them accordingly. And the way they used to do it, to indicate what grade they were, is they would put a little colored dot on the case of the transistor. And I went back and looked up to come up with a real world example from another type of home stereo audio amplifier that I've worked on before, and it specifies its gain ranges of its output transistors. Ones with orange dots have a gain range of 50 to 80. The ones with red dots have 80 to 110, and the yellow dots are 110 to 150. It doesn't necessarily matter which gain range you use in a specific amplifier unless the manufacturer says it's important. And sometimes they do. But what's important is when you have amplifiers that use pairs of output transistors, you want them to be in the same gain range. So for instance, if this were a more fancy home stereo amplifier, you would want to pick 2 oranges or 2 reds or 2 yellows because they match. So these, and the reason they come like this, where they're together, is I paid a little extra from the supplier, and these two are within the same gain range. It's within a matched pair for them is within 10%, which is fine. That's just what we want. These will have a gain range typically of 90. These two old ones, this one, the RCA, it has a gain of 6. And this one, the Texas Instruments, has a gain of 11. Now, remember, we have minimum, maximum, and typical. Minimum for these back in the day would have been about 40. Maximum would be about 120. I couldn't find a typical. So if you want to ballpark a typical, it would be the average between the midpoint between minimum and maximum. The reason the gain on these is so low is these are failing. They're old. There's been a lot of problems with the set in general. These probably have been over voltaged for a long time and they're starting to die. And we're not going to do this big repair for this customer and leave these in there. These are not inexpensive, or I'm sorry, these are inexpensive because they're old and nobody wants them. These are not inexpensive. Germanium transistors are expensive nowadays because they're not used in new products, they're only used in old products like this Intercom. And there are very few choices of places to buy them that are trusted and reliable. So you're kind of up against it if you need them because that's the way the world is today. So that's what those are about. And I'm going to show you how to put those in. And then we have these 4 here. These are also from the RCM4. These are what would be considered small signal transistors. They are also all germanium transistors, and all of these were bad. Part of the reason they may have been bad was the general overall poor health of the system, where it had been failing for a long time and it basically killed the transistors, or some of it also could be because the way the amplifier is designed, transistors are often designed into amplifiers as a chain, these at the end of the chain. This is a very simplified explanation. Little signal goes in here, gets boosted up. Bigger signal goes in there, gets boosted up. This one goes in here, boosted up. This one boosted up more, and then it goes to these and it drives the speakers. Very simplified, but that's the basic idea. Sometimes this chain of transistors, if you have one that fails, it will kill all the other ones also. I don't know if that's what's happened because this is all so old and it happened such a long time ago probably that there's no way to know for certain, but it's a possibility. One of the things I pointed out in the very first video in this series was about 2 transistors that were on the amplifier board, and let's talk about those for a second. So let's take these 2 and put them aside. These all have, this is interesting also, these all have little plastic caps on them, which are hard to take off. Don't want to come off. Anyway, the plastic cap is to insulate the metal body. Here's a replacement one, which is the same style. It has a metal body. The metal body is connected to one of the 3 leads, and they put the plastic caps on them basically as insulators so they don't accidentally touch something and ground out and blow things up. So that's why it has plastic caps. Those 2 we'll put over there. These 2 I talked about in the very first video on this repair. This one, the plastic cap is black, and I, for whatever reason, thought, well, maybe it turned black because the transistor got hot and it altered the color of the plastic and all of that. That's not what it is. This is black because it was painted black, and this one is painted red. This transistor is the same type of small signal transistor as this one, and it's the same transistor that's used throughout the entire amplifier board with the exception of the red one. These are all NPN transistors, and this one is a PNP transistor. Why is it painted red? Well, my guess is that it could be either that it was graded into a specific gain range, which is doubtful, but it's the only oddball transistor out of the nearly dozen transistors in the amplifier. It's the only one that's different than all the rest. Now, if you took them all, PNPs and NPNs, like this, brand new ones, and you threw them all, 12 of them on a table, without looking at the little numbers, you would know which is which. So it could be that these were painted red to make sure that whoever was assembling the board knew that this was the odd man out. That's a guess. I don't know, but I think it's a reasonable guess. Now, this one with the black is probably a black for a different reason. Since this is one of, say, 10 other transistors that are all exactly the same, and the other ones aren't painted black, why would you paint this one black? I think it might be because this one is actually graded. For whatever reason, when the board was designed and manufactured, the engineers thought it was necessary, or it was necessary, to make sure that this particular transistor is up to a certain level, has a certain grading to it, to have the amplifier work the way the design engineers wanted it to work. That's a guess. Is that important to us today? No, not really. Because as I talked about with these, there are very few choices to buy these. Little signal transistors like this, you don't get to choose a gain range. You don't even get to choose it with these. They don't offer them in 3 different gain ranges. They make these. They will match them for you to make sure that they're within 10%, but you don't get to pick. I really want yellow ones with a gain range of 110 to 150. No, it doesn't work that way. You get what you get. But since manufacturing processes are so much better nowadays, they're all reasonably consistent within a single batch. How many is in a single batch? I don't really know, but I'm guessing they probably make 10,000 of these at a time. So all 10,000 of them are all going to be very similar and very consistent because, again, it's 2024 and things are better than 1966. Little ones like this, same thing. You don't get to pick. It's what they send you. But hopefully what they send you is somewhat generic enough that it will replace the one with the black paint and not be a problem, because that's what it is. It's difficult sometimes nowadays because this is considered to be so old-fashioned that it doesn't get a lot of attention. As for replacement parts, to some degree, you have to make do with what you can find. I only buy new parts from trusted, reliable sources. I'm not buying any transistors like this on eBay, that's for sure, because you don't know what you're buying. You don't know if they're any good. They might be gray market or they might be completely empty inside. I've heard lots of horror stories. I don't do that. I buy them from reasonably trusted suppliers. What we're going to do now is we're going to install our 2 new output transistors into the RCM4. Here's the back of our RCM4. This is where one transistor goes. This is where the second transistor goes. That's where the original ones were located. First thing we're going to do is we're going to clean off the aluminum surface a little bit to get all the old heat compound off of it. And just a little alcohol on a cloth is all you really need. Clean it up. This aluminum bracket that they sit on acts as a heat sink, and it draws the heat away and keeps them from overheating and burning up. Underneath here, there's a socket, and underneath here, there's a socket also. I'm not going to take it all apart to show you the sockets, but that's what it is. When you buy transistors from this company, they come with a little hardware. What you have to do is you have to put insulators underneath the transistor. You don't want the body of the transistor sitting directly on the aluminum, because the body of a TO3 transistor, which is what these are, is part of the circuit. It's part of the 3 leads that make up the transistor. So it needs to be insulated. Now they do come with these little bushings for screws. We don't need to use those because these type of sockets have machine screws, so that'll work out fine. What you have to do is you take your mica insulator like this and you put some heat sink compound on it. Now this is a point where people get in trouble. This is made out of mica. Mica is a mineral and it's non-conductive and it has good heat transfer properties and. Some people like to use more modern solutions. You can buy something called a sill pad, which is a silicone pad that does the same thing. I'm not a big sill pad fan. We're going to take the back of our transistor and we're going to put a little heat shrink compound on it. I use this little Q-tip type tool, and we're going to smear a little bit around on here. Now, where people get themselves in trouble is more. They put way too much. The point of the heat shrink compound is completely and entirely to fill up the microscopic irregularities in the surface of the metal. If you put enough on here that it looks like you frosted your 10-year-old's birthday cake, that's way too much. When you tighten this down, there should be almost nothing that squishes out from underneath it. It should be the thinnest amount possible. I always put this on here first, on the transistor first, and then I put the insulator, and then we'll get a little more. Doesn't take much, little dab will do you. And that little tube of heat shrink compound, way expensive nowadays. So we'll put a little more and we'll spread it around. It's perfectly fine within reason. I'm concentrating. All right. It's the littlest bit on there. It's perfectly fine if you get a little bit on the pins. It's not going to matter. Now, on a TO3 transistor, the pins are not centered, they're offset, as are the socket, the holes in the socket. And if you put your finger on here to hold the socket down and you slide it in like that, that's all you got to do. Then you got to put the screws. Oh, and the screws, they were in a little metal cup. Why? Because I don't want to lose them. Do that. Get our screwdriver. What I like to do is start them like this. Just snug them down like that a little bit. Now, you need to tighten these down a little bit. You do not need to wrench on them. Yes, there are torque specifications for screws that hold down TO3 transistors. Do I know what those specifications are? Not a clue. Because if you do this long enough, you got a general idea when it's tight enough. And this one, like that. And this one, like that. Good enough. That's all it's got to be. I know guys that get all worked up over, like, oh, you need a torquing screwdriver and no, I don't think so. Okay, that's one. And now we're going to do our second one. Put a little bit on here. Again, we're not frosting a birthday cake here. And we'll put our insulator on. Oh, one of the things to be careful of, you don't want to crack the mica insulator. You don't want to fold it or bend it or twist it too much, because if you create a crack in it, the crack could compromise its insulating properties. Again, it's keeping the body of the transistor from touching the chassis of the intercom directly. And we'll hold up the socket underneath and we'll put the pins in place. Again, I'm at the wrong angle here. That makes it tricky. To see. I have to stand up. Some things you can't do sitting down. These are very good quality sockets also, which I like. It doesn't want to go in. Why? Pins look okay. Pardon me from blocking the camera. There we go. So now it's in place. We'll put our screws. Like that. Snug these down. That's all you got to do. Odds are you're going to get heat shrink compound smeared around on the transistors, which doesn't really hurt anything, but it also makes it look sloppy. And we don't like sloppy, so we'll clean them up just a little bit, like that. And that's how you install new output transistors into your Rittenhouse RCM4 master station or any other device, specifically usually amplifiers, that use TO3 transistors. As a point of interest, something you probably don't care about, is TO3 transistors, this style, these were designed originally and promoted by the Motorola company, and they were used originally mostly in car radios when car radios went from having vacuum tubes, yes, that was a thing, to being all solid state with transistors, because it was fast and easy and they took up less space, and so they were the ones that came up with it. One of the things that this set has, which I find nice, is there are actually little plastic covers that go over these. Why? Because the same reason why the little transistors have plastic covers. This is part of the 3 connections to the transistor, and because when you install this, you're shoving this metal chassis into a metal box that's inside the wall, and there's all this metal everywhere, that you don't want this grounding out and blowing everything up. So they put these little covers over it to cover them up to insulate them. Nice touch. I like that. That's how you do it. I hope you found this interesting, and perhaps for someone it will be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up on YouTube, because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications, and every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.